Ladies and gentlemen, we're getting ready to start the afternoon sessions. Good afternoon, everybody. The echo is not too loud in here, is it? I want to introduce our next speaker. Actually, I want to introduce Beach Class Transitions, which is Lynn Peel, who is sitting in the back, deathly ill with a sore throat or cough or whatever. I'm just kidding. We do have a doctor in the house, though. That's what you think. I want to introduce Nova Evers. Ewers, I'll get that right. And Nova is the Business Development and Marketing Director for Beach Glass Transitions, and she'll explain what Beach Glass Transitions means, because for most of us it doesn't say elder transitions or old age transitions or something that we're familiar with. But Nova is going to talk about wellness in support of caregiving employees, that sandwich generation. So I'll turn it over to Nova Ewers.
Am I on? Yes. So, hello. Yes, I'm Nova Ewers, and I am here today representing Beach Glass Transitions. And we are a team of senior care advisors. A couple of us are sitting back there. We work with families who are transitioning an aging loved one into senior care, and we guide them through that process. And what that means from a big picture perspective is we work with family caregivers where their aging loved ones are living usually in a sort of unsafe or uncertain circumstance. And we strategize and coordinate solutions that are going to bring the caregiver peace of mind and also make sure that that senior is in a safe environment. In this process, there are three primary goals for us. The first is to make sure that their medical needs are being managed by qualified professionals. The second is to make sure that financially we're leveraging their assets, their income, and any financial benefits they may qualify for to get the most care that they can afford, the best care that they can afford. Not just in the short term, but for the long term. The third and sort of my favorite goal, our favorite goal around the office, is the social piece. And that's to make sure that we're building quality of life into that care plan. We always say that it's not just about quality of care, it's also about quality of living, because at the end of the day, that's what we all want for ourselves and also for our aging loved ones. Sometimes this process involves bringing care to the senior in their own home and helping them to age in place with safety and gracefully. And other times, this means transitioning the senior into community care, so assisted living or nursing care or independent living. Over the years, we have worked with a lot of families, and these families come from all different backgrounds, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultures, they have different circumstances. But there's one trend that we've observed from one client to the next, and that trend is that most of these family caregivers are struggling with balancing work and their caregiving responsibilities. And for anyone in this room who's been in that position themselves, you already understand that that is quite the challenge. It's confusing, it's emotional, and it's time-consuming. So to address that, Beach Glass Transitions developed and launched a wellness program that I'm here to talk to you about a little bit today. And that's where we provide our services to employees as part of their benefits package on site in the workplace. This program is called Working Senior Care Solutions. In the process of developing this program, we did a lot of research, as I'm sure you can imagine. We read countless reports and continue to read countless reports to keep up on the trends of what's going on, what the statistics are, what the numbers are. But more importantly, and what I want to really focus on today, is the stuff that you can't read in these reports, and that's the stuff that we've observed with our own eyes, working with families exactly in this situation, working with employers, and surveying these people and finding out what they're really up against, what their stories are, what their day-to-day challenges are. And that's what we're going to talk about more today. By the way, there is an echo that I can hear. Can you guys hear it? I'm wondering, can you hear me if I just talk like this in the back? Everyone can hear me? No? All right. Okay. Back to the mic. So what we're going to talk about today is the stats, the stories, and the solutions. The stats are important. They really are important to know. The stories is what I, again, really want to focus on, but we'll come to that. Now I know this is a presentation faux pas to load your slide with lots of tiny words, but I put it up there because I want to read them to you one by one because I really want these numbers to hit home. So this is from a survey called Working Caregivers and Employer Healthcare Costs that came out a couple years ago. This is the largest survey of its kind, And what they did is they surveyed a company in New England of 17,000 employees, and what they found was that, by the way, average demographics, and what they found was that 12% of those employees were caregiving. In Maine, in our work that we do with our program, we find it's more like 12 to 15%. They found a significant increase in self-reported depression, diabetes, hypertension, or pulmonary disease of those caregivers who are balancing work and caregiving as well. That's all related to the stress. The average cost of what this actually cost employers, this increase in those things, diabetes, hypertension, pulmonary disease, was an 8% increase for health insurance costs for employees who were also caregivers. That was the average. So for specific groups like blue-collar caregivers, that was 11%. And for male caregivers, it was as much as 18% increase. That 8% increase is extrapolated to be $13.4 billion nationally for increased healthcare costs for caregivers. That's a lot of money. They also found a significant increase in absenteeism, so employees taking time off from work to manage their caregiving responsibilities. In this report, they do talk about it a little bit. What they don't talk about enough is presenteeism. And again, in our experience working with employers, what we're finding is that presenteeism, which is defined as employees being at work but not focused on work, so at their computers but Googling home care resources or Alzheimer's disease, what the signs and symptoms are. So they're at work, but they're not really working. And that is actually become a much larger problem because it is virtually impossible to track. So employers have very little idea of how much of an impact this is actually making. And what we're finding through our own research, for instance, one survey that we took of an employee, this was a confidential survey, and she didn't even feel comfortable in a confidential setting to tell us how many hours per week she was at work but not focused on work because she was so terrified that her employer might find out that it was virtually all the hours that she was at work that she wasn't focused. So presenteeism is a really big issue. And the final point that I like to point out, because I'm an example of this, is that this isn't just an older worker issue. And it's become about that. People assume that it's about that. I speak with HR directors all the time who say, well, most of our employees are in their 30s, so this isn't really an issue. And we find out that that's not the case because more and more there are younger and younger caregivers. And if it's not their parents that they're worried about, it's their grandparents, and they're playing an active role in that process. And this survey found that. This survey found that the largest surprise was the sheer number of caregivers between the ages of 18 and 39, and it was far more than they had anticipated. This is a graph from the National Alliance on Caregiving and their 2004 and also 2009 studies on caregivers. And particularly, this is the graph on how caregivers are accommodating their work schedules to fit their caregiving responsibilities in. I'm just going to focus on the top number. As much as 68% of caregivers that they surveyed were making significant adjustments to their work schedule. And you can see the categories: going in late, leaving early, taking leave of absence, changing their hours, giving up work entirely, turning down a promotion, early retirement, or taking the option of losing job benefits. That is a huge impact on caregivers, on employers. They say that the average cost of hiring a new employee is 1.5 times the salary of that position. If you have someone whose salary is $80,000 a year and they have to leave to take care of mom or dad, your losses in hiring a new person, training a new person, replacing that talent is $120,000. So also from that same survey, here's some additional statistics that are worth mentioning. On average, caregivers are 50 years of age. They are more often than not assisting a relative 89% of the time, but there are people who are out there taking care of friends and neighbors as well. They are providing care for an average of 4 years. It's a long time. That's the average. So there's a lot of people who are caring for much longer. They're providing up to 19 hours of care per week. That's a part-time job, in case anyone wasn't certain about that. And 61% of the time, they're employed while they're caregiving. Again, 64% of people are making workplace accommodations, and nearly 3 in 10 say that they need help making this balance happen. 31% of them are having trouble finding time for themselves, which again is important, just thinking in the stress of all of that. So now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the stories. And again, I'm going to read these out loud, and we're going to go through a few of them. But these are actual case studies of families that we have worked with through Working Senior Care Solutions. And these are the recap that you're seeing that we're going to read out loud. This is sort of the initial soundbite that we get. So this is the amount of information that they might call in and say, I need to set up a consultation. I've got a few things going on that I want to talk to you about. Here's the gist. I'm going to come back in a few minutes to why I'm only putting the gist up there, so we'll talk about that more. But in the meantime, this is one of those statistics that we were just talking about. This is the story of Jack, and names have been changed, as you can imagine. But this is Jack and the family, because it's always a family process. Jack was the employee whose benefit was being utilized here. But it was Jack and his sister, and they were both taking care of their mom and their dad. And the situation was that the mom was temporarily living in a nursing care facility. It was a short-term stay. It was a rehab stay in response to a hospital stay. The mom did need a long-term solution. She needed to be in assisted living. The dad was living at home, but he was unsafe. I believe in this case that he was living with Alzheimer's and not able to be on his own. So the sister had actually taken a leave of absence to stay home and take care of the father. Jack was still employed. He was a major player in his company, and he was incredibly stressed and worried about his family. He had no knowledge of any of these services or resources, didn't know what to do, knew nothing about the costs that were involved, and they were trying to find solutions quickly so that the daughter or the sister could go back to work. She was in danger of losing her job if she couldn't go back soon. So a situation like this is a complex one, and I'll just pick one thing to talk about in this example. That mom needed a long-term assisted living solution. Show of hands, people in here who work for assisted living communities or have been through the assisted living process. So quite a few, but quite a few haven't. So in the state of Maine alone, we have 4 different license levels of assisted living, but within each one of those levels, there are a lot of nuances that make one community different from another. The type of care you can receive, the quality of care you can receive, the social activities, the demographics of the population of residents who live there, the costs, not just in how much it costs, but how they structure their costs. Is it all inclusive? Are there fee structures? Are there add-ons? All of that is quite difficult to navigate and make an educated decision if you're unfamiliar with those services. At Beach Glass, as professional senior care advisors, it's our job to know those nuances and what makes each community different. And even for us, knowing it all, it's still a lot. So if you're a family caregiver and you're also, a CEO at your company or a manager or a partner, trying to take care of that aspect of it, but also educate yourself on what makes one community different from another, that in and of itself could take you weeks of researching, touring, taking days off of work to go see what these communities are like. And that's only one piece of this very big puzzle. The next story is Paula. This one is near and dear to my heart. It's quite a sad story, and this woman was really struggling. Her name, Paula, and her husband, it was her husband she was taking care of, and her husband had spinal stenosis. He has spinal stenosis. He's in a wheelchair, and he's almost completely blind and has diabetes. He is really completely dependent on his wife for care. And at this point, they have spent almost all of their savings on his medical care over the years. Paula is still working. She's in her early 70s. He's in his later 70s. And she has to keep working to pay for his care. And she's terrified because she lives hours from the closest family, and she's always worried that as she's helping him transfer out of bed into his wheelchair in the morning, if she pulls a muscle in her back or injures herself and can't work and can't lift him out of his wheelchair, what are they going to do? So they came to us. She was feeling depressed. She wanted some help for herself, but she also wanted to know what services might be able to help her get into a safer situation for her husband and for herself. In this example, I want to point out really about the depression. So much of the challenge of balancing work and caregiving is not necessarily needing to take time off of work to run and do errands or take mom to the doctor's appointment. It's coming back to that presenteeism issue. It's coming back to the fact that this is an incredibly emotional process. It's scary, it's difficult. And here you have a woman who is supposed to be at work, focusing on work and doing the best she can, and instead she is online researching, she's taking bathroom breaks to go cry in private, she's calling home to make sure her husband is okay. And what I should have said earlier when we were talking about the statistics is the value or the numbers in loss to employers. The National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP estimates it at roughly $2,400 per year per caregiving employee, and that is the loss of productivity due to presenteeism and absenteeism in the workplace. It is a huge issue. If you're a company of 100 employees and 12% of your population is costing you $2,400 per year, you all do the math. It's a lot of money. Roxanne P. So this is a bit of a different one. I've listed a bunch of questions. I'll go through it. It's Roxanne and her sister were taking care of their mom and dad. And Roxanne and her sister were trying to be proactive about planning ahead. We don't always see that, but we're always very proud of our clients when we do. Her parents were already showing signs of needing care, and so Roxanne had come to us to take advantage of her benefit and use a 30-minute consulting session. And in advance, because they're such good planners ahead, they had actually emailed us a list of questions of what she had explained. These are the most important things we'd like to accomplish in the 30 minutes. So what's funny is, and what I want to point out is these are some of the questions, and were deemed the most important questions, and we were meant to accomplish this in 30 minutes. Who do you receive Lifeline alert buttons from, and does Medicare pay for it? How do you obtain Meals on Wheels, or are there better food programs, and what does it cost? Is there transportation available through their city when the parents, are unable to drive to medical appointments and other things? Are there individuals that will attend appointments with elderly people and take notes? What happens to assets if one parent goes into a nursing home and one lives at home? What is the best way to protect assets? How much money can they leave in the bank, and can they gift money before going into a nursing home? How many years are looked back on financially before going into a nursing home? What other options are there besides nursing homes? What about prepaying funeral expenses? How do you do that? Are there other things you should be thinking about financially or in general? The last one's my favorite question. I could pick any one of those questions and talk about it for a whole half hour, and then at the end of the half hour find myself saying, we should probably talk more about this. And these are people who are planning ahead, so they're not in crisis, so they have time to think about these things and execute them slowly with care and with education. This is not the common scenario, but the questions are very common. It's a lot. It's more than you could feasibly do in any short period of time. And this is what people are online Googling, searching, trying to find answers to themselves, taking time off of work. And it's only some of the questions. So those are some stories I wanted to share. And the most important thing that I want you guys to take away today, if you remember nothing else, is that those stories, those sort of snippets that I've put up there, that's the tip of the iceberg of what these families are going through. You might be at work with your coworkers. You might be an employer hearing your coworkers talk about this, your employees talk about these things. And the parts that you hear, that's just the snippet on the top, on the surface. These caregivers are going through so much more underneath. And as employers, as coworkers, as professionals, it's our job to recognize that, and to recognize that while this person might be saying, yeah, I'm really worried about my mom, I don't know what's going on with her, I need to get her a doctor's appointment, she fell a couple of times in the last couple of months, but anyway, I'll work it out. That isn't as casual as it sounds, that there's a lot going on underneath, and there are things that we can do to help support and encourage these employees or coworkers. And it's simple stuff. It's being able to provide the resources they need to get help. And that's not to say that it's our job to assess in that moment as their coworker or friend, this is what you need, but just to be the one to say, there are resources out there that can help you. Have you heard of them? Here's a pamphlet. If you're an HR director, for instance, you can hand out brochures and things like that. Encourage them to get started. By far, one of the more inspiring things that keeps us doing what we do at Beach Class Transitions is when we sit down with one of these employees, sit down for a consultation session, for example, they come in for 30 minutes, they unload a bunch of questions, they unload sort of the basic gist of what's going on, and at the end of it, we have our checklist of, okay, here are the things we're going to follow up with you, here's the next steps. We haven't actually done those steps yet, we haven't actually followed up with them, we've just sort of made that list. And every single time, there is a huge sigh of relief, and they say, I feel so much better now, thank you so much. And sometimes there's tears, and I always think that's sort of funny because we haven't actually done anything yet. We haven't fixed anything, we haven't provided them with any solutions yet. We've just said, okay, there's a direction we can take, we gotcha. And that's enough to relieve so much of the burden and so much of the stress. And so again, as employers, as coworkers, the best thing you can do is help them to just get that sigh out, get them started, provide them the resources that can get them started. And then back to the iceberg thing. Remember that it's medical, financial, and social. I think it's very easy to forget that when someone is living with Alzheimer's disease that, oh, it's a medical diagnosis. Well, it's really much more than that. There's much more involved than just that quality of care that they need. It's the quality of living, and it's also a very complex financial situation. And so even if you're only hearing a little bit of the story, just remember that there's a lot more going on. And finally, I'll just wrap up by talking about our program, Working Senior Care Solutions, and then I'll invite questions. How we try to address those things is to really empower employees, empower those family members by evaluating their circumstances. And based on those evaluations, we educate them on what are the best options for them and where can they access the care that's going to give them safety and peace of mind. And then for the caregivers who want the extra help, we navigate them through that process. And finally, we become their advocates as well when they don't know how necessarily to be advocates for themselves. And that's our program. Does anyone have any questions?
At some point, is there any national discussions about that? And my other question, just in case I don't get another chance, is do you find that families and patients have a different expectation of assisted living than what assisted living thinks they can provide? Because, we're stuck with a social model only motto, and we find that sicker and sicker people end up in assisted living, and they're often in the ER.
Great questions. To your first question, I'm just going to preface by saying if there's anyone, I know there's some insurance folks here today, so if there's anyone who's more qualified than I am to speak to the issue, please don't hesitate to put a hand up. But what I do know about that is there has been a lot of talk, and in fact, I'm certain there are policies that are being written now for long-term care insurance that do have riders that offer payment for geriatric care management or other case management services. So yes, that is definitely happening in the long-term care insurance front. I personally haven't experienced it with regular health insurance. I have heard talks, but mostly people sort of dreaming about the idea that Medicare might pay for something like that, but I haven't heard any movement towards that. But again, insurance is not my expertise, so if anyone hears elsewise.
So I am one of the insurance carriers. You're right. Private long-term care insurance typically does have provisions for care coordination services. And I'll talk a little bit more about this during my talk later, but typically if you've purchased private insurance, that is part of what is included in your policy, either as Lynn said, a rider or included as part of your base benefit package. But you mentioned Medicare, Medicaid. The idea of them expanding their services right now, given where they are funding-wise and really how financially destitute those programs are, there's very little likelihood that they're going to be expanding coverage into areas that are not direct hands-on coverage with a patient.
Thank you. And I'll just add one more side note to that is this is why it is so important that employers stand up and do something about this, because the cost of care is so astronomical that without having a professional to sort of guide you through that process, you can really find yourself in some pretty costly pitfalls. And employers, proactive employers, are doing more and more to provide their employees with access to these kinds of services where insurance otherwise wouldn't. And that's very inspiring to see. Regarding your second question, yes. There is a huge disparity between the average person who walks into our office and their understanding of what assisted living is, what kind of care they can access there, and what they need, frankly. I mean, all the time we have people come in and they say, well, my mom needs a nursing home, and we meet the mom, and she doesn't need a nursing home, she needs assisted living. On the other hand, we have people who say, well, I'm trying to find an independent living place, senior community for my mom. We meet the mom, and she's got advanced Alzheimer's disease and chronic health conditions that really need management by nurses, and she's more appropriate for nursing care, and everything in between. We work in Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, and so there's a big difference between what assisted living means in Maine versus what it means in New Hampshire versus what it means in Massachusetts. In Maine, we're lucky that assisted living here, there are some communities, some of them are represented in the room today, that has such an advanced level of care that they provide. They have nurses on staff, 9 through 5, Monday through Friday, and on call at other hours, who are really able to manage a lot more of the health challenges that people would have that otherwise assisted living wouldn't be able to provide to them. That's a wonderful thing. We have clients who regularly live out the rest of their lives in assisted living and never have to transition into nursing care. They bring hospice in or maybe occasionally have to bring a home health agency in to sort of supplement some services, but it's a range, I guess, is to answer your question. There's a real disparity between what people expect and what actually is there, and that's our job to educate them. On the other hand, we're able to find often assisted living options that do have that social model, which will feed the social needs that these seniors have quite wonderfully, but also provide the medical care that they need. Does that answer your question? Okay.
No, but with the complexity of everything that people have to address when they're facing or entering into the discussions with you, it seems like it's so easy to get lost, and I can understand that sigh of relief when they finally find somebody who understands it better than they do. What do you consider a successful result for yourselves? And I mean, how do you know when you've succeeded, and how would we implement this to make things better for the economics of the future? Is there some economic benefit here by having you folks act as a case manager for folks?
That's a big question. I'm going to answer it in two parts. The first part is what do we consider success when we're working with clients, and then I'll come back to the economic part, which frankly I also might not be the most qualified. I'm not an economist, but I do have some ideas on that, so I'll come to that one. The first part, it goes back to, as I had mentioned early in the presentation, is there's a medical, financial, and social component to us, to this work. And how we sort of separate ourselves or distinguish ourselves at Beach Glass Transitions is that we really focus on the whole shebang. It's all important to us. It's not just what are their medical diagnoses, and is a nursing home or an assisted living going to be able to provide them those services, or can we bring home health in, or whatever it is. It's really about the quality of living piece. So we feel successful when a family caregiver comes to us, or a whole family of them come to us and say, here are our caregiving goals. This is what we want to accomplish. If we can accomplish what their goals are, or as close as to what is realistic, because sometimes their goals aren't realistic, if we can accomplish as close to that as possible while guiding them through that process and reducing the stress for them, making them feel supported and secure, but also make sure those medical needs are met, the financial piece fits so that they are really getting the most for their money and getting access to benefits that oftentimes they don't even know they qualify for. And then again, the social piece, making sure that this new living circumstance, again, whether it's in the home or in a community, is going to meet those social needs and give them quality of living, then we've done our job successfully. And that picture looks different for every family. So I couldn't say, well, we're happy and feel successful when X, Y, and Z is met. It really is going to be different in every circumstance. But it's pretty easy to tell at the end if we've done a good job. And I'm biased, but I think we always do a good job. But because the families let us know, they communicate it. Our service is very intimate, and we work with families over a long period of time. And so when all is said and done, we get hugs and many letters and notes, and they tell us exactly what we've done right and wrong. So that's the first part of the question. About the economics, that's a complex thing. I feel like that could be a presentation all on its own. But briefly what I'll say is when we start working with these families, they're often in financial trouble to start. So I should say we work with people of all different financial backgrounds, so people who have no money in the bank and people who have endless money in the bank. And either way, they are often overspending by either paying for services they don't need because they're responding to crisis. So, mom has been in the hospital and now she's in rehab and Medicare has overrun, so they're paying privately $500 a day, which is a client we just are working with this week. Or mom fell and now the sons and daughters are panicked and nervous, so they've brought 24/7 home care in, even if that's not necessarily what they need or the best, but they're paying for it because they're scared and they don't know what else to do. Or they're paying out of pocket for just an adequate amount of care, but they don't really have that money to spend to begin with. So these families are often in economic trouble. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to pay for care. They don't know what kind of care they need. They look at the price tags. They say, oh my goodness, a nursing home for $7,000 a month? How can I afford that? And when families are in economic crisis, communities are in economic crisis, cities are in economic crisis, and so on, especially if you add in the factor where these employed caregivers are in economic crisis, they're also at risk for losing their jobs, or they're cutting back hours. So they're actually reducing their income. They're paying more for services, maybe not the right services. Or worst case scenario, they're not paying for services, and so then mom gets further injured. Now she's in the hospital. It's a bigger tug on the economics for the community and for the government. So it is a huge issue, and I guess I'll wrap up the answer by saying when we come on board and work with families, we quiet all of that. So we sort out their care needs so that they're paying for the appropriate amount of care and that they're leveraging what they have to pay for it, either through benefits or through assets that they have. And they're not going back into the hospital with repeat accidents and, further worsening their circumstances. Does that make sense?
Let me ask one more follow-up to that, because that sounds really cool, but what percentage of the population can you folks serve? And are you unique in the services you provide, or are there other similar organizations? And how would we ramp that up to help a lot of people? Because there is a lot of confusion when people start to enter this stage of life. Are there enough people to work with everybody? And how do you address this for so many people who are so confused?
That's a great question. It's a growing industry, as I don't really have to tell anyone in this room, I'm sure. Just in the almost 6 years now that we've been in business, we've seen new agencies that are opening up that are doing something similar, and that's incredible to see because the word needs to get out that services like this exist. Personally, at Beach Glass, the way that we're doing it is we are expanding the workplace program, which again speaking to economics, I should have really spoke about that. That's where we're really making a big impact because we are reducing these losses that employers are feeling by a significant factor by helping their employees. So we're reducing absenteeism, we're reducing presenteeism, and we're expanding that program. And one effort to expand that program as well as to expand our private services, we're also going to new platforms. So we've created a product, many of you in this room are probably familiar with this, is Transition Key. And this is a DIY, sort of do-it-yourself digital guidebook that we offer. Right now it's a product, but we are moving towards an online space where we'll be able to reach infinite numbers. I mean, there'll be no limit to how many people we'll be able to service through this program. And what it does is it follows the Beach Glass Transitions approach to guiding families through this process, to helping them evaluate what they need, educating them on what that means and what services are available, and finally showing them how to access that. So we are working very hard to expand our reach. As face-to-face people, there are only so many clients that we're able to service, although you'd be surprised at how many we are able to service through our processes that we've developed over the years. But we are constantly moving towards reaching more and more people because the demand is there. We have to find those ways. Any other questions?
Did everyone hear that?
I'm going to repeat your question. I think I heard you. You said, are there assisted livings in the greater Portland area that provide medical and social? I didn't hear that part. Okay. I think I see what your question is. I want to say yes, but to be honest, I'm not 100% clear on what your question exactly is. Are you just saying, do they provide that quality of care and quality of living even if the person is on main care? Yeah. Right. Yes, so there's a range in terms of payer source. You'll have communities that will be strictly private pay and nothing else. You'll have communities that will accept main care but only after a period of private pay, and then you'll have communities that will accept private pay or main care regardless of, someone can have no private pay and just have main care, and they will be accepted there as well. You will see a range from the private pay to the sort of intermediate to the main care ready communities. You will see a range in quality of care and quality of living. You'll see a range in how pretty the furnishings are and how fancy the food is at mealtime. And also in general with assisted living, and this is not just for our state but across the board, you're going to see a range in communities in terms of how desirable they are to live at. I don't know any other way to put it, but also what people want varies so much. So we have clients who love, what one client loves in one community is totally different from what another client loves in another community. So there's something to meet everyone's needs, and absolutely there are incredible facilities out there that are main care ready that provide a very high quality of care and a high quality of living. There are private pay communities that don't. So it's just such a range. And that's, again, one of our roles as senior care advisor when we're working with families is to provide them that insight on what that range is. So community A versus B versus C, what makes them different? What are the different qualities of care you're going to see, and quality of living as well?
Nova, thank you very much. We'll be
Thank
back
you.
in here at 1:15 for a presentation. Go ahead. Also at 1:15, we have a presentation, a breakout session, and 2:15, Rich Blumenthal will be doing a breakout session. The 1:15 session is with Tim Vogel. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're getting ready for our presentation by Judy Clinco of the Caregivers Training Institute. Come on in, grab a seat, make yourself comfortable. Let me tell you a little bit of what little I know about Judith Clinco. She's an RN. She's from Arizona, Tucson, if I'm not mistaken. And she was brought to my attention by somebody who's on our board in Quinlan, who was nice enough to suggest that we might want to look at caregiver training institutes here in Maine as a way to ramp up and deal with the future shortage of workers. So she recommended Judy, and Judy was more than willing to travel to Maine, despite our cold weather and all the other things that we have here, and she's got a chance to spend some time with a good friend. Judy has had a lot of experience. I believe you own your own home care business. I've forgotten the name of it, but was incidental in founding a group in Arizona called Caregivers Training Institute. It raised a lot of money to train a lot of people, and it's something that we should look at here in Maine as a possible way to actually take some action in getting better quality, better pay, more people trained to take care of elders and people who need long-term care. So I'll turn the floor over to Judy Clinco.
Well, thank you so very much. I'm thrilled to be here. And, I certainly am very happy to be able to share with you my own personal experience in creating the Caregiver Training Institute. As Ken mentioned, I do own a home care company in Tucson, Arizona, that I started 32 years ago because my mom needed care. So as many family caregivers somehow wind up getting into the business because of they see the opportunity, and also for me it was being able to create a quality organization. And I think based on my nursing education and nursing practice, my commitment is to assure that elders do receive not only a quality of care that leads to quality of life. And in my own experience of running my company, right from the beginning, 32 years ago, I hit up against the wall of qualified caregivers. And I remember within the first 4 weeks of starting my company, I started an internal training program. And I think we recruited 7 caregivers, and I think we did a 40-hour training program in a little tiny room. But right from the beginning, it really was clear to me that the issue in terms of being able to grow my company and being able to provide that quality care was being able to recruit caregivers who had the skill and knowledge that they needed in order to be able to be competent and confident with the care that they were providing. So after a while, a number of years later, I actually was able to secure a grant from the Department of Commerce, and I was able to match money from that. And at that time, we were offering the standard of training was 75 hours for a certified nursing assistant in the state of Arizona. And with the money from the Department of Commerce and the matching dollars that I put in, I developed 150-hour caregiver CNA training. And I developed 3 levels of training within that one curriculum. Was the companion, the personal assistant, and then the CNA. And with that curriculum, I think we trained about 150 people in our community. And unfortunately, because home care is per diem work, you work your employees as you have assignments to be able to provide for them, that in order to have the course be economical and be able to provide the training at a reasonable cost, what happened is that we would graduate 10 at a time, and I would only be able to capture 2 or 3. And the rest were going off to the community. So ultimately, my company was subsidizing training for the community. And I felt that that really wasn't a very good model. And then I got involved on a national level through the Direct Care Alliance out of New York City, and really became very educated about the critical shortage of the workforce. And at that time, and that was in 2000, in 1999, 2000, not only was there a critical shortage, but there was a constant turnover of the workforce. It was a real revolving door, and whether that was in nursing home, assisted living, or home care. And I think that the employers felt that this was a pretty disposable workforce. They didn't invest in any training. The wages were low, and people didn't stay, and it didn't seem to matter to the employers in terms of the impact of that would be to the quality of care and quality of life of the people who they were responsible to care for. At that time, I brought the information back to our community, and I said, maybe perhaps we need to look at a solution that involves us actually all working collaboratively. And I even think today it even rings more true that, just last year, I've been involved with an organization called the Shift Network, and they said that we were moving from the age of technology into the age of cooperation and collaboration. So I stand for that, and I really think that for any community to come up with solutions to a huge problem such as the aging of your community, of your residents in your community, that it really is going to take collaboration and cooperation, and for us to put aside our competitive edge and say what's best for the people who live here in our community. So I'm going to go through my presentation, and there'll be opportunity for questions and answers. And so here we go. So the Direct Caregiver Association was how I started the name of the organization. And it was one community solution. And then they eventually changed the name. This doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Okay, goes the other way. Okay. So the Caregiver Training Institute and our vision was to honor, value, respecting and training the direct care worker, thus assuring that people who need care are treated with skill, dignity, and compassion. And I think that not only was there a lack of training standards, but certainly the direct care worker wasn't being honored or valued. In our community, if you wanted to be trained as a certified nursing assistant, you're required at this point in time to have 120 hours of training. So Arizona did raise the standard from the national 75. And then in addition to that, if you wanted to work in an assisted living community or an assisted living home, you were required to have 50 hours of training, and there's no requirement for training for people who are working in in-home care. The Caregiver Training Institute is a collaboration of long-term care employers, the city government of Tucson, the county one-stop program, and each county does have a one-stop program where federal job training dollars are funneled into the one-stop, and then the one-stop is where people go who are underemployed, unemployed, labor displaced, where they can go and receive services and actually secure job training dollars that can follow the individual to a community college or to an approved job training program. We also received support and collaboration from foundations and then also individual donors. What brought us together was the crisis in long-term care workforce. Certainly it's the aging community. You've heard enough about that today and are aware of the 10,000 baby boomers daily retiring. And then they keep saying we need 1 million new direct care workers needed by now the year 2018. And that's just to keep up with the current demand. And so I know that in 2000, it was in 2008, and then it was going to be, and we needed 1 million, and then in 2008, and it was going to be in 2012, we were going to need 1 million. So they keep pushing this million forward, but it's still by 2018 is what the projections are. What brought us together were the current direct care workers training failed to properly prepare employees. And you may say, well, 120 hours, that's not too bad, or 50 hours, or maybe that might be adequate. But in the state of Arizona, if you wanted to be a dog groomer today, you're required to have 600 hours of training, and a manicurist pedicurist is required to have 650 hours of training. You know, and you think with the manicurist pedicurist, the worst that's going to happen, you're going to have a bad nail day. So here we have our most vulnerable population being cared for by people who come to the work because I believe that many of direct care workers have a calling to do the work. They're compassionate, caring individuals who dedicate their lives to caring for our loved ones. And then we as a society say, oh, well, 50 hours of training, 100 hours of training, that'll get you where you need to go in terms of the job that's required. And it doesn't come close. So it was insufficient number of caregiver graduates to meet the long-term care employers' needs. Where caregivers were being trained was at the community college level. And there were a couple of other preparatory college programs, Apollo, there were a couple of them in the community that were fee-for-service and very expensive. And then candidates for training were not screened to employer standards. And in fact, most people who enter caregiver training in our community at that time weren't screened at all. So if you want to become a professional direct care worker and go to your community college for CNA training, you can do that as long as you pay your tuition and attend class and graduate from the program with a certificate. But the fact is that, you know, the community college can screen people because of the public funding that they get prior to putting them into a training program like this. And I don't believe that everybody has the nature or the ambition or the desire to really enter into this work for the right reason. And I think that screening should be a very important component of caregiver training. The first steps towards a solution was six long-term care employers came together, and we pledged $500 a month for a year as seed money. So it was really a risk of faith. You know, I said, let's come together, let's work collaboratively. We started to meet, and then 6 employers did step forward. We hired a part-time director, and the employers met every 2 weeks to discuss actions necessary to these challenges. We did a community-wide survey of employers and direct care workers. That was long-term care employers, direct care workers, and consumers. We received a grant from the Department of Commerce, and we worked collaboratively with the University of Arizona Center on Aging. And with the Center on Aging, we did focus groups of those 3 categories. And we did that up in the northern part of the state for the rural areas, and we did that in Tucson, which is definitely more urban. We had a day-long planning session where we brought in a facilitator. We determined the association's membership, that we felt that we wanted initially to have it be a membership-based organization. And then local industry and community leaders volunteered to become part of the board. We incorporated as a 501c3 because we felt that by being a 501c3 would give us an opportunity to access resources, financial resources, that we wouldn't have been able to had we been a for-profit organization. The association membership stakeholders, we felt that who's impacted by all of this is certainly the long-term care employers, consumers of care, direct care workers, and then supporting organizations. And how the members participated, board membership was a 2-year term, and the board determined the goals and the directions of the organization and assisted with the fundraising activities. And then we broke into committee work where we had an education committee, public relations, finance, and membership, and then also accessing benefits and services. The goals of the public education and awareness is that the general public really doesn't understand the plight of what's going on in the long-term care industry. And we really felt that it was really most important to really get out and educate the public and letting them know that this issue would really be impacting everyone in our community in a very personal way, and that the importance of once someone is educated, they can then move to taking action to begin to make changes in the system. We felt we needed to enhance the public perception of the direct care worker promoting direct care work as an honorable, valued profession, deserving of great respect, higher wages, and more career opportunities. And actually, in some countries, direct care workers are considered to be holy people. You know, as here in our country, is if you couldn't get a job doing something else, you could get a job as a direct care worker. And frequently, direct care workers would even refer to themselves as butt wipers, that they didn't even perceive any value or respect to the work that they were doing. Our goals were to create new direct care worker training, create a 200-hour quality expanded direct care worker training curriculum for all long-term care environments. And for me, it didn't make very much sense that we had one curriculum to train people for assisted living for 50 hours, and we had another curriculum that was 120 hours for people who wanted to be CNAs. And I felt that we should go ahead and combine all of the required educational material into one curriculum and create a universal worker. So it would be more opportunity for the worker, it would be more opportunities for employers. And that certainly 200 hours, in my mind, wasn't pushing the envelope as far enough as it really needed to be pushed, but it certainly was a beginning. And we felt that a steady flow of continuing education material could also be developed through this, so that we would eventually be able to offer continuing education to the employers in the community. We also wanted to create a credential for direct care workers in home care, and we didn't quite get that done. Through the Direct Care Alliance, the national advocacy voice for direct care workers, and money from the Ford Foundation, the Direct Care Alliance has created a national credential for direct care workers. Although it was one of my goals, we didn't fulfill on the goal, but certainly the National Direct Care Alliance has moved forward with that goal and is making strides in that area. Our program was actually to create a caregiver resource center and offer expanded CNA training leading to state certification. We decided what we would do is do community-wide recruiting. And we reached out to workforce development programs. We reached out to the One Stop. We advertised in newspapers. We used to hold orientations at the libraries, and that was free space for us. And we would do orientations where we would have anywhere from 10 to 35 to 50 people show up on a Sunday afternoon to learn more about this industry and how they could, actually get the training that they needed in order to obtain a job. Consistent, thorough applicant screening. So we set up a whole application screening process. So for anyone who was interested in being trained, they had to be screened. And initially, we actually even were doing reference checking on folks. And then also we moved into the direct care worker professional development and job placement. So in order for, a lot of people came to us who were educationally and economically disadvantaged. And that they hadn't, the reason that very often they were in that situation is because they didn't do well scholastically in school. So for a lot of them, they really needed hand-holding, they needed a lot of coaching, they needed mentoring and support. And then when they graduated from the program, we did have a job placement component. We were also interested in being able to provide continuing education for employees, and that it just makes sense in my mind. I know as an employer myself how expensive it is to provide continuing education for my staff. It's certainly easier to outsource that than it is for me to be able to develop that and offer it internally. And then also, we were interested in looking at family caregiver training as another component to the work that we would do. How the Caregiver Resource Center was funded was we had annual membership dues. We had training program tuition. We had state and local job training dollars that were brought to the table. through the community block development grant opportunity through the city. I think initially the first year they gave us $25,000, the second year they gave us $50,000, and every year subsequent to that, through today, the city has provided $100,000 of workforce development money that has gone towards being able to provide tuition assistance to folks who were going through the training. And then also with the state job training dollars that came in from the One Stop. Job placement fees was another part of how we brought in money. A workshop and skill training fees that we, when we reached out to employers who were interested in having us contract and provide those services for them. Private donations and bequests, foundations and grants, and corporate gifts. So there was opportunities to reach out to lots of people in the community for support. And it was a pretty easy sell because not only were we talking about providing a higher quality of care to elders, but we were also talking about providing opportunity for economically disadvantaged individuals to be able to move into livable wage jobs that provided a future for them. So it really was a two-pronged solution that we really were providing the fishing poles that so many people needed rather than providing the fish. And while we were providing the fishing poles, we were also impacting the quality of care and quality of life for our elders in our community. The annual membership fee, their initial plan, was that long-term care employers would pay a base rate of $1,000 annually. And then they would pay an additional fee based on the number of direct care workers who they had employed. So it was pretty nominal fee when you think about it. If you added the most that anyone was paying, if they had 76 or more direct care workers who were employed with them, would be $2,000 a year annually to be a member. And then because we were sensitive to the fact that assisted living homes that have 10 or less people living in them were bringing in less financial resources, that we charged the assisted living home $250 annually. And then sponsoring organizations who believed in what we were doing and wanted to support us and have their name associated with our organization, we charged them a $1,000 base rate annually. And to job placement fees, if you hired a part-time, so you paid an annual fee, and then you would have access to our graduates. And for hiring a part-time employee would be $350, and hiring a full-time employee was $700. And that was billed to the employer over a 3-month period. And when you begin to think about how much it actually costs to recruit, screen, and prepare a direct care worker for your organization, this was a pretty economical way to being able to bring in an employee, a new hire, who had already been screened, who had a background check done, who had CPR, who had first aid. We provided for all of our students white shoes, so they either got immaculate white, good sneakers, or they got nursing shoes. We gave them a blood pressure cuff. We provided a stethoscope. We gave them a watch with a second hand, and we paid for their certification exam. So we were really producing a high-quality product for these employers, that it was an employee who had all the credentials and the information and knowledge that they needed to be able to be an effective employee within their organization. The other reason that we provided blood pressure cuffs and stethoscopes to our trainees was that I also believed that they could become the go-to person in their community and within their family. And now that they had the knowledge about hypertension, they understood better about the diet that people needed to be on when they did have hypertension. They had a blood pressure cuff, that they actually could become a health advocate in their own community. And gosh, we certainly need as many health advocates, wellness advocates out there as we can muster. What we've accomplished, we implemented this 200-hour model training. And within the model training was 16 hours of cooking, so that they really, we brought in a professional chef, and with money from the Southern Arizona Community Foundation, worked with a professional chef to develop the curriculum, the cooking curriculum. And within that 200 hours, there was stress management, there was time management, there was communication skills, it was understanding personalities and different personalities and how to work with them. Plus, we provided them with all of the educational material that was required by the state. And then they had, I think it was 50 hours of skill development in our skill lab under the supervision of an RN. And then they had 40 hours of direct practical training in a nursing home under the supervision of an RN. So, you know, it wasn't just the core work that was required, but we added on a lot of additional educational information so that they really would be better prepared to cope in the environment that they were going to be working in. That within nursing homes in Arizona, we have no staffing ratios. And then in addition to not having staffing ratios, when certified nursing assistants are trained, they're trained to take care of 10 people during the course of their shift. And then if one of their coworkers doesn't show up or they have a job vacancy, they're required to take care of 15 or 20 people during the course of their work. Well, you know, even the time management and figuring out how do you do that and how do you stay on pace, I think it's absolutely impossible for any one human being in the course of 8 hours to take care of 10 frail elder people and think that we're really actually getting a warm washcloth to their face and getting a toothbrush in their mouth and really providing the love and the care that they need in a compassionate way, rather than just doing it on a, you know, on a rotation and just it's how we as a society could actually fathom that we could ask someone to provide the kind of care that we would want for our parents and our loved ones within that type of time frame. We raised over $3.5 million from 2000 through today. And over $2 million of those dollars came from government job training dollars. So again, that was the Pima County One Stop became a great source of support for us. And that people would show up at the Pima County One Stop and they would be unemployed or they had been recently laid off. And the counselors would work with them. And if it was determined that this was an area of interest and they were interested in pursuing a career as a professional direct care worker, we would go ahead, they would send them over to us. We would then test them to make sure that they could read at a 7th grade level. We would then, you know, evaluate them through our screening process. And if we felt that they were a good candidate, we would then send them back to the Pima County One Stop, and then Pima County One Stop would qualify them and send them back to us with the training dollars. They provided the training dollars for as long as the individual was in the classroom. Once the individual dropped out of training during the training session, the payment would stop at that point. But as you can see, you know, in the next slide, well, 92% of all the students actually graduated. So I really felt that that whole screening component really produced the ultimate result of being able to graduate at such a high percentage. We built an actual training facility in collaboration with Goodwill Industries. Goodwill had a 3,800 square foot space that was a huge industrial bay. And the head of Goodwill, I said, well, gee, how do we get down here? How could we, you know, partner with you? And she said, well, if you can raise the money to build out the space, we'll have a deal for you. So we raised $230,000 to build out the space in a period of 6 months. The city of Tucson, again, community block development money for public facilities came into play there, as well as private donors and foundations. And then what Goodwill did is they took the cost of the build out and they prorated that against our rent. So for the first 7 years that we were in the building, we were paying $250, then it was $300 and $350 a month. So we didn't have to be investing in rent. We can continue to just invest in the infrastructure of the program. And then we continue to revise and improve the curriculum. The Caregiver Training Institute, in my mind, it has been a win-win for our community. Employers, I know that even now, today, I have turned down business. I turned down four new assignments last week in home care because I just didn't have caregivers available to be able to provide the care. And I just don't see, we say, oh, the industry is going to grow. Well, the population of people needing care is going to grow. Will the industry grow? It's going to really be dependent on whether there's qualified workforce. And there are employers in the community who are willing to hire people with no training. If you took care of your dog and you did a good job with that, well, of course, you'll be able to take care of a senior. Well, the whole issue is that with people living longer, with medical intervention, with folks having a constellation of chronic illness, that the kind of care that they needed 30 years ago when Grandpa needed someone to come to the house and sit on the front porch with him and bring him a lemonade and a sandwich is very different than the senior today, who needs assistance with ambulation, who has cognitive impairment, who may have difficult behavior. And then also, not only is the caregiver dealing with the issues of the senior, they're also dealing with the complexities and dynamics of the family. So, we as employers, I just don't see how, without a qualified workforce, we are going to be able to fulfill on our promise of being able to provide high, reliable, quality care. And I think that there's a big gap here in our society in terms of what we promise and what actually we're able to fulfill on. And I think it's a solution certainly for the direct care workers. I think that we're doing people a disservice when they have in their heart the desire to provide this kind of care. They want to make it a lifelong career. They believe they have a calling for this work. And for us to not provide them with the tools and knowledge that they need so that they can really deliver the services in a competent manner, it's not only an impact to the worker in terms of their self-esteem and their safety, but then we also begin to look at the impact to the client. Certainly when a urinary infection isn't identified, because the worker doesn't have the knowledge as to why they're pushing fluids. They're said, make sure you give these people plenty to drink. Well, if you don't know that if you don't get plenty to drink, what that may lead to, particularly in an older adult, and then you have an older adult who has a urinary tract infection, and then you don't have someone with the skill to know, to be able to identify and translate that into symptoms that are underlying a urinary tract infection, and the need to report that to a supervisor so that intervention can be done, it leads to a hospitalization, and it can lead to a very costly hospitalization. So I think that because we have everything so siloed we have hospital, and when you go to the hospital, well, Medicare pays for that. So we don't have to be concerned about that. But the fact is when someone goes to the hospital, when the older person they go to the hospital, they come back from the hospital, they do survive, and they are more debilitated. They require more care. So there is an impact to the long-term care industry when someone is hospitalized. But because of the siloing of the pain, we're not being smart in the way we are addressing this whole issue. And then the consumer is really impacted. Think about yourself and being visually impaired, having poor hearing, not being able to ambulate independently. and to have different caregivers coming in and caring for you continuously. How fearful people must be. And not only the whole fear and the lack of a sense of continuity, but then it's also the impact to their actual care and the impact and the cost to the community, and then our community as well. So this was our solution. We have now 1,500 more direct care workers in Tucson, who have a higher standard of training, and that many of those students who went on to caregiving careers have now gone on to become nurses. So it really did become a pipeline to higher paying jobs and other job opportunities in terms of professional training for these individuals that they certainly would have never had in the past. So I'd like to open it up for questions. Yes.
Well, just fantastic what you've done.
Thank you.
You ought to be complimented, my goodness. I can remember people talking about in the 80s we were going to be in this mess. About now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Anyway, it's great what you've done. I just was curious because oftentimes I hear people saying, well, we can't pass on higher wages under the current rate structure and so on. Whether you've been able to whether you're able to leverage what you've done in Arizona for higher rates of reimbursement or.
Well, that whole reimbursement piece. I remember, I think it was AARP. I was at a meeting, and it was $267 billion a year being spent on long-term care, and the majority of that is being spent by the federal and state governments. So it really is until we have the feds drive more money down to the states, and the states drive more money down to the employers with a mandate that goes to direct wages, that a portion of that goes to direct wages for the workers. I don't know how we're going to move those wages forward, and we really need to do that. Now there's this big talk about moving minimum wage to $10.20 an hour. That certainly will have an impact because in many states, direct care workers are being paid minimum wage. In some states, they're paid below minimal wage. And because direct care workers are not covered who work in home care are not covered under the Fair Wage Labor Law. So some of the states do have workers who are being paid. I remember listening to a conversation. I was on a conference call with the Department of Labor, and a woman in Mississippi said, I can't afford, I'm not reimbursed enough to be able to pay minimum wage and still be in business. Well, shame on us. So, I think that with the baby boomer population and the voice that baby boomers have, I hope that we won't tolerate that. I think it's probably close to that because they're paying $8, $8.50 an hour. And, so here we have direct care workers who are living in poverty. Who are being subsidized by government benefits for housing and child care and food stamps. It's not a good model at all, and I'm not sure how we move about changing that. We just, through the Direct Care Alliance, took on the advocacy agenda of minimum wage and overtime for home care workers. It's taken us 5 years to get to the place where the Department of Labor made a ruling last month, and there was a hearing yesterday by the employers to say this is unfair. Now, we have to stop this. So I don't even know if that's going to go into effect because they do have a whole year before it gets implemented. So I really don't know what the solution is, but I think as a society we are going to have to come up with a solution, and we're going to have to come up with one fast because it's going to have to change. Either we're going to open the borders and allow all these folks from Mexico to come up and become our family caregivers, or, I just don't know who's going to fill the gap because there's less women entering the workforce, to do this kind of work, and, there are more people and more people who need it. I'm sorry I don't have an answer. Yeah.
In addition to what we're just talking about, since wages typically follow productivity, do you think by increasing the training, since they only get, let's say, 50 hours of training compared to, manicures, Do you think by improving and increasing the required training for these workers, and also the fact that it seems like there's going to be a shortage of them, do you think their skill level and the supply will affect wages? It seems like there should be some market influence here.
You would hope so, but it hasn't as of now. And I think that the reason that everyone's so resistant of providing more training is because when people have more training, they demand more dollars in pay. So there's been this whole, it has been this whole denial, like almost ignoring that people need training to do this kind of work. And the fact that Arizona, still doesn't have a training standard for home care workers. And there you have people who are in the home, who are unsupervised, who are taking care of very high-risk individuals. It hasn't followed suit in this industry. Yeah.
Hey, Judy.
Yes, Ann?
Two pieces of this from my recollection of working with you on the program. The trained direct care worker who's employed, say, in an assisted living, but then for whatever reason there's a breakdown in communication within the organization itself, and that care worker leaves. You created an intervention program to bring the supervisor in. Remember that piece of it?
No, that never, we weren't able to move that forward.
Because I thought that was such a great idea.
Yeah.
To find out where did the breakdown happen.
Right.
Were they going somewhere else because it was another 50 cents an hour?
Right.
That was just one thing. The other thing was if you were able to go forward to develop the microloan program for your employees.
No, we never moved forward with that, and I'm actually thinking in my own company of doing a microloan program.
For a battery or get a car repair.
Yeah, exactly. That we're actually, considering putting something like that together in my company. But we weren't able to do anything through the Caregiver Training Institute. But I think that, you begin to think, well, who else is the market out there? Family caregivers need training. Who's doing that training in this community? Our Council on Aging does some training, but they don't do it effectively. But here we have the skill lab where you can bring family members in, you can charge them a fee for service, you can teach them the skills that they need so that they can go back and be safe in providing the care that their loved one needs. And by having more skill, I think that you feel more confident and you're less stressful about the care that needs to be provided. So I think there is a market out there for the family caregivers. I think that there is a market out there for providing that link between the worker and between the trainee and the employer in being able to help provide resolution to issues, but it didn't happen for us.
Judy, a couple of questions. One is you started off identifying this as a crisis, and you mentioned a million people nationwide that we need by 2018. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So this obviously must be a crisis. But, how do you ramp something up to address a million people by 2018? Is this something that can grow or has grown since you started it?
No, we haven't replicated the program elsewhere, but I think it's a replicable model. I think that any community can, that could come together and say, yeah, we need to be focused. And I think that it's great that the community college provides this kind of training, or Apollo College provides this kind of training, but to have an organization that's specifically directed on that recruiting, the screening, and providing high-quality training, it just made sense. And when you look at, $3.5 million and 1,500 direct care workers, you couldn't have spent the money any better. I mean, it's not a whole lot of money when, in the scheme of things, when you look at how much money is spent on job training dollars that never amounts to anything, that people drop out along the way and they don't complete the training and they decide that it isn't what they want to do. And after they even start working, they drop out. So, I just felt that, like pulling resources together. And that we were able to bring that $3 million to our industry that would have never been there. That when I went out and reached out to the Workforce Investment Board, and I said I was interested in being on the Workforce Investment Board, and they said, oh, well, no, you're only training caregivers. Like, we weren't even on the radar. But after we started, what I did for the first year and a half, I decided that I was so committed to the program that I left working for my company and I worked for the organization as a volunteer. And I worked 4 years, the first 4 years at no pay. And the first year and a half, all I did was go out and educate. And I had this great document that was created by the Aspen Institute that said the unnecessary crisis in long-term care. And I went out to the mayor, and I went out to the city council, and I went out to the county board of supervisors, and I asked them who else I could go and speak to. And I had a one-page program, one page just describing what the issue was and what we were going to do in our community. And I was able to enroll people. And that, you know, it's almost like being the Pied Piper. Somebody has to be doing the speaking even when there's no evidence that this is going to happen. And it was very interesting because Hersha invited me to do a presentation in Dallas, Texas, and I presented this program. It was an imaginary program. I mean, I was just making it up and, you know, doing the slides, and it was like, well, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to do. And I went back and I just moved forward to do all of that. But in educating the community about the issue was the first step, and it was the most important step. Because then, you know, once they understood the issue, they were, even if they weren't totally supportive, they were like, oh, my God. And then I would say, this is about you. This is about us. This is about our future aging and who's going to be there to care for us in the future. And now I sit on the Workforce Investment Board, you know, and I've been able to present to the Workforce Investment Board. But that money would have never come to our industry because our industry, whether it's because it's a young industry, we're very short-sighted. You know, we're very competitive and we're very short-sighted when we really need to be coming back and looking at, you know, this is a problem that's affecting, this is an issue, this is a challenge. It's not a problem. It's a challenge and it's an opportunity that's affecting all of us, and it's affecting our bottom line. And it is to all of our best interest and to the best interest of our community and to each of us individually to come together and create a solution that will, you know, we actually now have a factory in our community that's turning out professional direct care workers. And that never would have happened had we not come together. And that $2 million we brought in from the One Stop would have gone to the aerospace industry or to manufacturing, to industries that are much higher in profit margin, who can pay for more training than the long-term care industry will ever be able to afford. So I'm hopeful for the future, but there's a lot of work to be done, and I think it really is about putting aside the competitive edge and working collaboratively, and because it's challenges that we're all sharing, and that when we arrive at solutions to the challenge, it's going to benefit each of us, and it's going to benefit the people who we care for.
So has the 1,500 students that have graduated, has that alleviated the demand supply shortage?
No, because everybody from Maine is moving to Arizona. You know, for the warmer weather, they're all looking to come to Arizona to retire. So we have more and more seniors moving in. So, you know, and I met with the head of our economic development office, and he said, well, you know, I lived in Denver, and our goal was to keep seniors out of the community. And I looked at him, I said, well, we're already here. You know, there's a lot of us that are already here, and there are a lot more that are coming. Any other questions? I hope that in some way that I've inspired you, you know, that coming together and dialoguing, you can come up with solutions that can really have a very positive impact on your community and on your businesses. And I think, you know, certainly when we look at family caregiving, and, you know, when we talk about the economic impact to businesses because family members can't find good caregivers, they're concerned that where they have their family members, they're not getting the care that they should receive. So, you know, again, that, you know, by having a qualified workforce, that impacts those family members and provides for them peace of mind so that they can be at work and be as productive as they want to be.
We're going to start sending buses to Arizona to transport your folks back here.
Right. Right.
Judy, thank you very much for your
Thank you.
presentation. I appreciate that. And we'll be back here in 10 minutes for the presentation by Brenda Gallant on long-term care ombudsman program.